The methods I show in my videos on how I do my toes, my feet, where I put a ball of clay, you might say, under the foot pad, and I'm using the little rolls of clay for the toes. That's the same process I use for competition pieces. The biggest difference is going to be the amount of time that I spend shaping those toes once it's, during the mounting process, and just fine tune them, trying to create the knuckles, definition, and just better shapes overall. It's just a matter of putting more time into it to get it as close to natural, accurate as you can. The inner two toes on each foot, like on a cat or a fox, a coyote, most of these animals that I'm doing videos on, are a little bit longer. The digits of each toe are longer than on the outside toes. So it creates that knuckle, it causes that knuckle to be up a little higher than the knuckles on the outside. When I use the regulator needle and I poke it into the sides of it or into the legs to hold it in position while I'm sewing or whatever, I don't worry about those holes because it was a round tool. Just poking a round smooth hole in, and when you pull that back out, it just seals itself back off, as opposed to a three-cornered needle that we sew with where it actually cuts the skin. When I use the upholstery needles to hold the animal up while I'm sewing and stuff, I do that, yes, even on a competition piece, I will use those. Like I say, they're almost self-healing. if you're really jamming in a long ways where it's really got some diameter to it, you might want to mess with that, massage that hole a little bit when you pull it out, just to make sure you're not going to get any glue coming out. I never seem to see a problem when I'm using the upholstery pins and stuff. That's fitting. The holes that you're repairing before you're mounting the skin are different. There are holes that are actually in the skin. They have that shape as a hole. When you're pushing the pin in, it's just a round needle that you're pushing in. And when you pull it out, it closes back up. So it's not you're not really creating a hole through the leather. It's like almost like self-healing. I've been using rubber gloves or nitrile or latex gloves for many years to patch holes, and I really haven't seen or had any problems with it at all, unless the skin is too oily for the glue to stick. But other than that, no problems with that. On a big hole, and I talk about that, on a big hole you might want to sew it first. I still sew big holes. Anything that, especially short-haired animals, where that little bit of glove might show. You know, once the skin dries and it shrinks, the skin shrinks, it makes that hole bigger, so it's stretching that glove out a little bit. The glove isn't strong enough to hold that hole shut. So if it's something the size of the end of your finger, you might want to sew that up, if it's especially on a short-haired animal. Longer haired stuff, a lot of times depending on where the hole is, you can get away with it. But remember too, a hole the size of the end of your finger in the back of an animal, even if it's long haired, can create a flaw in the very outside edge of the hair. When I'm talking about like the guard hairs, the extreme outside of the fur, when it's all fluffed up, there can be a little flaw show just because there was a hole down underneath there. Any holes that are in areas that are quite visible, like on the outsides of the legs or on its back or on its side, as opposed to on the inside of the leg or on the belly where you're really not going to see it. It's critical to sew those holes, the larger holes, and make sure you have a good seam there, or you are closing that hole up so you don't have an imperfection in the flow of the fur when it's dried and finished. Occasionally on a larger hole, I'll take thread and stitch the hole shut, just loosely stitch it shut to give it some strength, so when I put a rubber patch over there, it can't expand as the skin dries. And that seems to work out quite well on larger holes. I use a baseball stitch. That's where each time the needle goes into the leather side and comes out on the hair side, just back and forth. It does seem to help keep the hair out of the stitches a little better. Geez, there's one leg already. When it comes to creating toes on a mount, there's many different ways to do it. The method that I've developed with the rolls of clay, that seems to work really well for me. Like I say, there's many other ways. You can just pump them full of caulk, some people do. Some people smush them full of clay, and then like a big old water, a ball of clay in there, and then squish it out afterwards when they're trying to shape them. I see all different methods being used, and I see all different results. And some of the results are really bad, at the point where it's quite obvious they overstuffed them or overcaulked them or whatever, and they can never get enough clay smooshed around or whatever it is they have in there to ever get any definition back in. So it's important to remember what you're taking out of there and replace it with a comparable amount of whatever it is you choose to replace it with, so you can get the skin back to where it belongs and have in order to have accurate definition in the toes. When you look at an individual species, you're going to see differences from animal to animal as far as their hair patterns go, especially like the face on a bobcat, where just the spots on the sides of the bobcat, its belly, its back, its legs, all over a cat, you're going to see all kinds of different variations of hair patterns. But they all still have some very common hair patterns that you're going to see on every animal. And that is like the white fur on the inside of the leg as opposed to the brown fur on the outside of the leg, and the line that it creates. There's also a similar line down the back side of the leg where the inside hair and the outside hair come together. So when you talk about hair patterns, or when I mention hair patterns and you talk about adjusting hair patterns, it's more a general term and not so much each individual spot or a line or a stripe or something like that. We're looking at the way the hair grows and the way the hair lays on that animal in its natural state, and getting those in the proper places on the legs and on the back or the center, like on a bobcat. Many of them you'll see a center line right down the middle of their back. So make sure that you have that going down the center of the spine, depending on what the position of the animal and what it's doing. You should try to keep everything balanced and it makes sense for the position that the legs are in and the body's in. you'll see me Dremel the Achilles area and some other definition areas, or rough some definition areas where I want to show muscle detail. The purpose for that is I'm getting rid of that slippery, shiny, hard skin of the foam and giving the caulking or the glue, whichever you're using, a good surface to bond to. And mostly with the Achilles area, it's more about thinning there than it is actually the glue being able to stick. I want that area to be thin so it almost feels like there's no foam left there. So, which is natural in a live animal. It feels like it's just skin to skin there, which it is, with a little bit of connective tissue between. Some different animals that you work on, I don't know, I guess cats especially. I really enjoy doing the cats, and there can be so many differences in them. And you'll have an occasional client that wants one way, and the next client wants it a different way. And in regards to its size and how you're going to show off its size, whether it's relaxed, it's laying out on a log or a rock because it just got done eating, it just fed heavy feeding, and its belly is gorged, but yet it's still all relaxed on this log or this rock. That's going to create different issues in the mounting process than, we'll say, the client that wants his big male leopard, it's stalking, and he wants every muscle to show and every muscle bulging and as if it's a bodybuilder. So those are two entirely different things when it comes to preparing that form and how you're going to mount that skin, how loose how tight you're going to mount it in this area and that area. So keep all those things in mind, and your test fits are going to tell you a lot on that, how much you can get away with. If you want to, like, say, if you're going to plan on using every square inch of that skin and really blowing that thing up to look like a bodybuilder, or if you're going to do it just laying down, just all relaxed out and make it look very soft and not so chiseled and muscle-like, but still have muscle tone, but very soft and just lazy and around. So two different looks and two different ways of going about it. One client I had harvested a leopard, and they had been waiting for this leopard for like 3 days and hadn't eaten, and when it finally came in, she shot the leopard, and it was very thin because it hadn't eaten for quite a while. And pictures she showed me, I mean, it looks really thin, not emaciated, but just thin, you know, it hadn't eaten. And that's the way she wanted this cat to look when it was mounted. So it's a little different than what you'd normally think, that you're going to want to make a leopard or a mountain lion or an African lion or a bear, make these animals look as big as you can possibly make them. And here she was the exact opposite, and actually wanted it to look skinnier than what it normally would. So it was a bit of a challenge in the other direction, but very doable. Skin has a natural tendency to stretch long and skinny, and whether that's a small mammal or large mammal, anything, even just during the skinning process, you have a tendency to stretch things long. So once it goes through the tanning process, it typically will stay that. It always just has a tendency to be long. So you always want to stretch a skin to width, get as much width out of the legs, as much width out of the neck, the body, every part of the skin, as much as you can, to get the full size of the skin and try to get it back to its original natural dimensions. quite often I'm asked about which size of head to order for a bobcat, because they've taken a measurement that is in between the sizes that are available. We'll say, for instance, you measure your cat head and it's 1 5/8 nose to eye, and we have 1.5 inches in the catalog, and the next size up is 1 3/4. So what I usually tell people is, if it's a male, I'd go to the 1 3/4. If it's a female, I would drop back to the 1.5 inches. A tom typically has a bigger head than a female, so and if you're not sure which it was, I mean, a test bit's gonna tell you the best thing. It's never a bad idea to have a few extra heads on hand, just a foam head there that you can stick in the hide when you're doing your test bits, and know which size is going to work better. You can go ahead a size smaller, and you can make up the difference with caulking or stuff. Be careful that you don't over bloat the head, because your ears are going to start going back farther, your ruffs are going to be back farther. You're going to start distorting your hair patterns and where your skin needs to be to create the proper hair patterns. And I've used the upholsterer's regulator needles there, I guess they are, to kind of hold it in a position so it's handy for me to sew it. Trying to keep as much hair out of the stitches as I can. Brush the hair back before I pull them tight. Remember, when you're lining up your skin to get the hock in the right position there, or the heel, I should say. That heel, when I make my incision, I always cut around the side of that heel, so that stays a little pocket there for lining the skin up. seldom will you see me putting pins in a freshly mounted animal to hold things in place. Once in a while I do on the face, or once in a while up underneath the body if the skin wants to sag and fall away from the belly just because of gravity or something. But typically I don't use many pins, and very seldom ever pin anything. And I guess the reason for that is I don't mount these skins so tight that they have a tendency to want to stretch across and drum any of the detailed areas that I want to show. If it's just a muscle line on the thigh, or the rib line where it meets the belly, the loin area, down the middle of the back, when I press that skin to that form with the caulking underneath there, I'm not pressing it because it's singing tight and I'm just trying to get it to stay there. It stays right there because the skin is loose on there. And even with the amount of shrinkage that I get with this tan skin, it's still not so much that it's going to pull away and drum, and I have to really work at holding those things in place with pins. They're usually not necessary. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want to say that I never pin. I've pinned a lot of things over the years, especially on African animals, where you seem to get a lot more shrinkage. And it also has to do with the fit. On large life-size stuff, you're going to get a lot more shrinkage, so you might want to be prepared for that and put some pins in some critical areas and stuff, so as it does start to shrink, you can stay on top of it, and you'll notice if there's going to be a problem. So yeah, pinning isn't, if you're comfortable with pinning, pin. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different way of doing it. So I guess what I have a tendency to do, rather than pin something all up and set it aside to dry, is I will go back the second day and the third day and the fourth day as it's drying and work those areas, and that eliminates the pinning process right there for me. A good reason to use a lot of pins is in production work, where you might not have the chance to work on that piece again the next day or the next day after that even. Maybe a little bit the second day, but the third and fourth day are out of the question. Pin that thing up. Get everything to stay where you want it to stay, and so you don't have to babysit it so much. Production work is totally different than competition work, that's for sure. Competition piece, I would just keep working it and working it and working it and bagging it each night so I can slow down that drying process, as opposed to commercial work where I want it to dry so I can get paid, get it finished and get it out the door and get paid. So two different processes there. The pinning it's a good idea. Okay, another good reason to pin, say on a Friday, you mount this thing up, it's Friday afternoon, you're not going to be back in the shop till Monday. It's going to do a lot of drying by Monday possibly, so you maybe want to do some extra pinning there just to hold things in place till you get back on Monday and see where it's at. has a long tail but doesn't use their tail for balance. It's another very important issue and something to keep an eye on when you're positioning the tail and looking at reference. Why is that tail in the position it's in when the animal's doing what it's doing? Is it for balance, or is it just relaxed? You know, there's usually a reason the tail is in a position that it's in. Okay, in case you have any young budding taxidermists in the room, you may want to push them off to another room. We're going to talk about genitalia now. When it comes to the penis and the testicles on a mount, there can be a big difference between a commercial piece and a competition piece. Remember, in competition, the judge is most likely going to be feeling those parts and checking them for anatomy, so you know, the correctness of shape and all that. So I think you'll see me using a piece of bird neck material, for instance, on coyotes and fox for the penis. And in competition, I actually was questioned about that because I did use it on a competition piece, and the judge felt that it was still wet because he could feel that foam collapsing a little bit through the tan fur there. So keep that in mind. You don't want to lose a point over something that simple. And for the testicles, as opposed to using just some cotton or some paper towels or even some soft oil clay, you may wish to make them out of a more firm material or clay that will harden, or epoxy, something like that, so that there won't be any give in the skin when it's when they're checked for anatomy. When I'm getting ready to sew up a tail, you'll see me take the blow dryer to that tail. I'll brush it out. You'll see me taking the blow dryer to it. And I'm blow drying the fur and not the tail skin. I don't want that tail skin all dried out because it needs to, I have to sew it on there. It needs to wrap around and still be damp. But I'm drying that fur out so that it's very simple. Just for the simple reason I want the masking tape to stick to it. It won't stick to it if it's wet. So that's the only purpose for blow drying the fur on the sides of the tail there when it's spread out and taping it down. You don't want to over dry it because you will be shrinking that leather as you're drying it if you actually dry the leather out, you know, while you're blow drying that tail before you sew it up. You can still sew it up and it can still possibly work fine. It just might not fit the tail the same way that it did before you dried it out. I had a student that when we began to sew up the tail, she was insistent on wanting to put glue in there so that she would be able to taxi that skin on the artificial tail as it was sewn up. And I assured her that and showed her that the way we laid that tail on there, and we checked that tail and the skin to make sure it was going to come together okay and not be super tight when you sew it. And I don't know, I've never had a problem with that. You get them sewn up, and when you fit them properly, that skin can still rotate on that artificial tail, even though there's no glue in there. So it just doesn't seem to be a problem. I guess if you're concerned about drumming on the tail because you didn't put glue in it for competition, the judge squeezing that tail, if there's going to be any drumming, it would be because you didn't use a proper sized tail inside there. So with a properly sized tail and the taper of it, there should not be any drumming in there that the judge could feel that easily. When it comes to what artificial tail to use for commercial work or competition piece, whatever, use what you're familiar with as far as for commercial work, what works best for you. And when it comes to competition piece, it depends on what category you're competing in, I guess, or what division I should say, whether it's amateur, professional, or masters, or master of masters. I mean, at different shows they have different rules, and at the higher levels you may have to create all the parts yourself. So keep that in mind. Don't buy a tail and put that in if you're not allowed to, rule-wise. At the lower levels, I don't know of any show that wouldn't allow you to use a commercially purchased tail. I make all my own tails for commercial work and for competition, so guess that hasn't really been an issue. With the exception, I do purchase tails for mountain lions and leopards and African lions. If you've been competing at the lower levels and you're moving into the masters, you might want to consider making your own form at this point if you haven't already. There's supposed to be some serious advantages point-wise to making your own form, but you have to keep in mind it has to be done correctly. So, and that's where a lot of people might miss out. They think that they should be getting extra points for making this or that themselves, when in fact they might just as easily be losing points because they didn't do it correctly. When it comes to the positioning of tails, I like to consider that tail as just a continuance of the spine, which it actually is. You want to have nice flow from where it meets the body all the way out, but you also have to keep in mind right where it attaches to the body and how you do that, so that when you start moving that tail in a position, you don't create a kink there, you don't create a knob or a bulge or something that shouldn't be there. The dock of the tail is very important. It's the joint between the tail and the body, so it needs to be a nice smooth transition. And then when you go to positioning that tail, look at reference. I see a lot of tails on different species in positions that are just wrong for that species. And I'm not saying they can't really do that. Sometimes they will, especially in severe action moments. But if you're going to do that in a severe action moment with the tail, then the body should also be in a severe action moment to make the tail make sense. So try to keep things making sense, I guess, is how I'm going to put it with the tail. And use some reference, and don't just put a really super artistically creative, swoopy, curved tail on an animal that typically carries their tail straight and maybe can't even do that, like the prehensile tail on a monkey or a possum compared to, we'll say, the tail of an otter, where it's pretty, they have a hard time bending their tail much. So anyway, it's two totally different things, so keep that in mind with your reference and how you're positioning tails. As you're putting caulking into the skin, we'll say on the body, squirt a big lump in there. You'll feel, see a bulge in there, and then work that across the body through the skin. You'll feel that bubble of caulk. You'll feel it moving ahead of your hand as you're sliding your hand along, and you'll feel it run out. And if it runs out before you get where you're trying to get it to, then you either need to press harder or you need to put more caulking in there. And over the body, it's, I guess, if you had 1/8 of an inch of caulk everywhere on the body, that'd be great. Maybe doesn't even need that much in spots. On the legs, less than that. You just need enough to slide that skin around, really, even on the body. If you have enough that you can slide the skin around, or you can feel that you can slide the skin around, you have enough in there. The important part is working it into every area so you can slide the skin around anywhere on that cat that you want to move that skin. I'm starting to blow dry this out now, and at this point, to me there's no difference whether it's competition or commercial piece. You want good loft and fluff in this mount. You want it to look clean and shiny. And now we can start seeing the top line. We can start seeing our hair patterns and adjusting them. Like there and move it around under the knee area and stuff. You just got to look at all this stuff and make sure everything's where it belongs. Look at the top line, and what I mean, does the tail have nice flow coming off the body? You know, does it look like it's part of the spine, or is there a lump there? And does it look, you know, distorted or out of place? You know, anything that looks out of place probably is. So make sure that there's no wrinkles in the skin. As that fluffs out, you'll see a line in the fur if there's a wrinkle in the skin. So a lot of times you don't even need to feel a mount to see that there's wrinkles or lumps in it. You can just see the very top surface of that fur and see the flaws. So. see that skin around.